Hello, everyone. I don't know if you were able to see our fabulous Lagback video. We could hear it, but I don't know if everyone was able to see it. Either way, my name's Adam Zevlin. I'm an associate at Schiller DeCanto and Fleck and vice president of Lagback, and I'm one of your co-moderators tonight.
Hopefully we'll have less technical difficulties today. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Janish. I'm an assistant state's attorney here in Cook County, proud member of Lagback and treasurer for Lagback. Also with me is
Nisha Dotson. I'm a Lagback board member as well. I'm a lawyer in the law office of the Cook County Public Defender's Office in the Felony Trial Division.
Thanks, Nisha. Now we'll, before we start our program, we're going to hear a few words from our president of Lagback, Moses Suarez.
Hi, thanks, Matt. And I just want to welcome everyone for attending this event today. Thanks for taking a moment to join Lagback, Chicago's LGBTQ+ Bar Association, for a conversation with Congresswoman Marie Newman regarding the Equality Act. My name is Moses Suarez. I'm a partner at Smith Amundsen in the healthcare practice group, and I'm also the president of Lagback. I'm very honored to do that. Happy Pride to everyone. We're delighted to offer unique programming for our members and the general public, such as this. As lawyers, we're responsible to further the public's understanding of and confidence in the justice system, because legal institutions in a constitutional democracy depend on popular participation and support to maintain authority. Now more than ever, each of us plays an important role in strengthening our collective resolve for human rights and in upholding constitutional protections for all. I want to thank Congresswoman Newman for her leadership and advocacy for LGBTQ+ rights, and also to John Davidson for sharing your expertise today. Also want to thank our Vice President, Adam Zevlin, for spearheading this town hall. Special thanks to our co-moderator, Matt Janish, and our entire board who's helped to promote and put on this program. Without further ado, I'll pass this on to Adam. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. Appreciate it, and appreciate your support as always. And I see Representative Newman has joined us. But before we get to the star of the night, I'd like to introduce Skip Harsh. He's a fellow Lagback board member and also Zoom extraordinaire. That's why we're able to put on this event tonight, is because of Skip. Skip is the director of the American Bar Association's Commission on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. Not only is he on Lagback's board, but he's also the co-chair of the Chicago Bar Association's LGBT committee. And he is going to give the CLE instructions as well as introduce our other esteemed guest, John Davidson.
Skip might be frozen up here, so we might have to just get back to him in a little bit. See, we were hoping for no technical difficulties. Anyway, let me introduce our representative. Maybe she can give a few words before, so we can see if Skip can get back to us. It is, with a great honor to introduce our featured and guest speaker for this evening, U.S. Representative Marie Newman. She serves in Illinois' 3rd Congressional District. The district encompasses parts of southwestern Chicago and many of the nearby suburbs, including Oak Lawn, Western Springs, and Lockport. Representative Newman is also a member of the Progressive Caucus and a supporter of the Equality Act. Lagback is so very proud that you are able to join us this evening. At this time, before we start our official presentation regarding the Equality Act, Representative Newman, we'd like to give you an opportunity just to say a few words to introduce yourself to our viewers and participants.
Well, I am so honored to be here tonight, and I'm so glad you invited me, because you all are very representative of what it takes to make sure that everybody has equality and equity. What you'll find on my entire platform is that I see it through the lens of equity and equality. whether it is an economic policy, a civil rights policy, or anything really, environment and transportation. And until we have equity and equality for everyone, we're really not going to have it for anybody, right? So for me, this is a very personal topic because my daughter 6 years ago went through the journey of transitioning to be a fabulous trans woman. And it was, I'm so deeply proud of her, and she's my rock star hero. And as a result of that, she not only opened up a new world for her family, but for everybody around her. You know, my family has been for decades LGBTQ plus allies, and so proud of that work. But when you walk side by side with someone that has transitioned through great triumph and great challenges, it brings on entire new meaning. So when I advocate for the Equality Act, it's because my daughter has experienced this. She has experienced discrimination in education, discrimination in housing, discrimination in public, discrimination in private, in retail establishments. You all know this, right? So while I'll never have the lived experience, I have the mom experience, which is kind of the next best thing. So thank you all for the amazing work that you do. And I'm very excited to have this discussion tonight. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Representative.
Great.
Thank you.
Adam, Matthew, can you hear me?
We can,
Yes.
Skip.
Wonderful. We had to turn some things off. I apologize. Welcome, everyone. My name is Skip Harsh, and I'm so excited to be here. Representative Newman, thank you. But my job tonight is to introduce you all to John Davidson. John has been one of the nation's leading lawyers fighting for LGBTQ civil rights for the past 35 years. He's currently chief counsel for the Freedom for All Americans, which is a bipartisan campaign to secure comprehensive non-discrimination protections for LGBT people nationwide. In his current position, he's co-authored and helped pass Virginia's Comprehensive Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Non-Discrimination Law. He's also coordinated amicus briefs in the Bostock and Fulton Supreme Court cases. Yep. And has been actively lobbying for passage of the Equality Act. Before joining Freedom for All Americans, he was the National Legal Director of Lambda Legal, the largest and oldest national legal organization committed to achieving full recognition of civil rights of LGBT persons, those living with HIV, for 12 years and worked there from 1995 to 2017. John, it is such a pleasure and an honor to have you here. Thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it over to you for comments.
Thank you, Skip, and thanks for asking me to speak today. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk with you all about the Equality Act, which was H.R. 5 in the House and is S. 393 in the Senate. I'm also delighted to be able to join Congressperson Newman this evening, and I want to thank you, Congresswoman Newman, for your passionate testimony in support of the Equality Act delivered before the House Judiciary Committee, and the many other ways that you've spoken out in support of LGBTQ rights. Now, while most people think of the Equality Act as only an LGBTQ rights bill, it's important to understand that it also expands protections against discrimination based on sex, race, national origin, color, and religion as well. But for LGBTQ people in particular, passage of the Equality Act would be a milestone achievement. It would ensure that all LGBTQ Americans can live, work, and access public spaces protected against discrimination, no matter their zip code. While people in Chicago already have these protections under the Illinois Civil Rights Act and Chicago's Human Rights and Fair Housing Ordinances, it's important that these protections cover all Americans and protect Chicagoans when they travel to other jurisdictions, and ensure that federal agencies can assist states and localities in remedying that discrimination when it occurs. There have been bills introduced in Congress to establish federal protections against at least sexual orientation discrimination for almost 50 years. The first bill introduced back in 1974 by Bella Abzug. The Equality Act was originally introduced in 2016. It's passed the US House twice, both times on a bipartisan basis, first in 2019 and then again in February of this year. It now awaits a vote in the Senate. The Equality Act would essentially do three things. First, it would enact express protections against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in employment, housing, credit, and jury service, amending Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and the Jury Selection and Service Act. Second, it would add protections against discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity to the federal bans on discrimination by public accommodations and by recipients of federal funding, amending Titles II and VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And third, it would modernize and expand the kinds of public accommodations in which discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity is prohibited by federal law beyond Title II's current coverage of only places of short-term lodging, restaurants, and entertainment venues to instead include, or also include, any establishment that provides a good service or program to the public, including specifically stores, shopping centers, online retailers and service providers, banks, service or care centers, shelters, food banks, travel agencies, funeral parlors, and establishments that provide healthcare, accounting, or legal services. It would really be a very large expansion of protections against discrimination for all people. So why do we need this? Well, although 21 states and more than 300 cities have passed LGBTQ non-discrimination protections, 50% of LGBTQ people live in the 29 states that still don't have express protections against such discrimination. This patchwork of protection leaves far too many people behind. Unfortunately, sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination remains shockingly prevalent in this country. In a survey conducted last year, more than 1/3 of lesbians, gay men, and bisexuals reported experiencing discrimination in employment, housing, education, public spaces, or by the government or in government-funded programs in the previous year. 1/3 of the lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. And more than 60% of transgender people reported that. The levels of discrimination were higher among LGBTQ people of color and LGBTQ disabled people than among LGBTQ people who are white or currently able-bodied. In public accommodations alone, a 2020 survey found that more than half of LGBTQ respondents have experienced harassment or discrimination in a public place, such as a store, on public transportation, or in a restroom. Similarly, a 2020 Gallup poll reported that 24% of African Americans experienced similar unfair treatment in a retail setting in the previous 30 days. The Equality Act is not only needed, America is clearly ready for this legislation. The House vote was a bipartisan 224 to 206, and a recent poll by the Nonpartisan Public Religion Research Institute found that more than 3/4 of Americans support LGBTQ non-discrimination protections, including 62% of Republicans, 78% of independents, and 85% of Democrats. The poll also found that more than 6 in 10 members of every religious group support non-discrimination laws protecting LGBTQ people. This includes more than 8 in 10 Hispanic Catholics and white mainline Protestants, and approximately 3 in 4 Black Protestants, white Catholics, and Mormons. The Equality Act has also been endorsed by a broad coalition that includes more than 400 businesses that employ 14 million people and operate in every state across the nation, 60 trade and professional associations, including the National Association of Manufacturers, the National Restaurant Association, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and more than 500 advocacy organizations. Now, some people have asked why we need the Equality Act, given the Supreme Court's ruling last year in Bostock versus Clayton County. There are 3 reasons. First, the Supreme Court's ruling is incomplete. It held that Title VII's ban on sex discrimination in employment encompasses sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination as well. And because the court's reasoning was about the nature of sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination and not anything unique to Title VII, it should apply to other federal laws banning sex discrimination, including the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Title IX, and Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act. as a number of courts have begun to realize and hold. But there currently are no bans on sex discrimination, and therefore no hook for gaining protections against sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination in the federal laws governing discrimination in public accommodations or federally funded programs aside from education. And that is what an important part of what the Equality Act would do is to add bans on sex discrimination and sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination to those laws. Secondly, the court's ruling is insecure. A future Supreme Court might decide differently. And although the Biden administration is enforcing the Bostock decision across all federal sex discrimination laws, a different administration might do something differently. Third, the court's ruling is inadequate. People are entitled to the kind of clear statutory notice about what their rights and responsibilities are when it comes to discrimination affecting LGBTQ people, which is what the Equality Act would provide. Now, there's a lot of misinformation being spread about the Equality Act by anti-LGBTQ forces. Some claim it will strip away religious freedom, but the Equality Act applies precisely the same balance between rights of free exercise of religion and rights not to be discriminated against that have existed for nearly 50 years with regard to discrimination based on race, color, and national origin. Religious institutions will still have the protections of the ministerial and co-religionist exemptions that they have now. Some have claimed the Equality Act will allow transgender students to access public school restrooms and play on sports teams consistent with their gender identity, as if either of those things were really a problem. Regardless, the 4th, 7th, and 11th circuits have already ruled that the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause, as well as Title IX, already prohibit public schools from denying transgender students access to facilities that match their gender identity, and no circuits have ruled to the contrary. So the Equality Act doesn't change current law in that regard. Similarly, the only court to rule so far on transgender sports bans has granted a preliminary injunction against Idaho's ban based on the Equal Protection Clause. Again, because this is constitutionally mandated, there's nothing Congress could do to lessen the protections that the Equal Protection Clause already provides. And Title IX, which the Equality Act does not amend, likewise likely already requires the same result. Right now, we're waiting on the US Senate to send this crucial bill to President Biden, who has pledged to sign it into law. The most important thing you all can do is to call your senators, both of whom are co-sponsors of the Equality Act, and not only thank them for supporting the Equality Act, but also urge them to reach across the aisle to secure Republican support for the Equality Act as well, because we're going to need 10 or 11 Republican senators to vote for the Equality Act in order to overcome a likely filibuster. The second most important thing you can do is to ask your family members, friends, neighbors, and colleagues to do the same thing, particularly those who are in states whose senators have not yet endorsed the bill. You can also join Freedom for All Americans' Act for Equality campaign by going to our website at freedomforallamericans.org, which provides easy to follow instructions on how to call and what to say. Let's make this year a year we can really take pride in by finally securing passage of this critically important law and ensuring that all Americans are protected against discrimination in public life, regardless of who they are or whom they love. Thanks.
Thank you so much, John, for giving us an overview of the Equality Act. That was amazing. We really appreciate your expertise in this area. And now we'd like to bring some questions to Representative Newman about some of the impressions that she has about the Equality Act. I know that you said that, you gave us a little bit of an introduction as to why it's important to you and why it's important to your family. But I kind of also wanted to make sure that it's my understanding that the Equality Act is not only for people, minorities regarding sexual orientation and gender identity, but it also expands civil rights, if I'm not mistaken, with race, religion, as well as other ethnicities. Is that right, Representative Newman?
Yeah, and I think that John touched on it, that it is critically important to understand not only is the prevalence of discrimination with LGBTQ folks of color much worse than it is with their white counterparts. And we have to make sure that we bring equity to that equation and create equity and stop discrimination, because people will choose any reason to discriminate. It can be because you are LGBTQ, it can be because you're disabled, it can be because you are a person of color, and that has to end. But I will say this with regard to the Equality Act, and I frequently underline this, is that whenever a movement is successful, the reason it's been successful is because it's legislation and we've changed hearts and minds, right? Is that it can't be one or the other. That the legislation on its own won't do everything that we want to do to change people's hearts and minds. We have to work on that actively every day. So this is a way of saying that there's just no reason on God's green earth you should ever discriminate. Discrimination shouldn't exist. So let's start there and create equity and equality through that.
Representative Newman, changing hearts and minds is the best way to go about any of this, obviously, and I totally agree. The problem is that your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, their hearts and minds are not easily changed.
Right.
And now the Equality Act is stuck in the Senate due to the filibuster.
Yeah.
What do you think the real odds are of the Equality Act having the 10 votes in the Senate from the other side to get past the filibuster and onto the president's desk?
So there's probably 2 or 3 paths that it could take. One, we could negotiate a moderated filibuster around civil rights acts and our democracy. That's one model that's kind of floating around in negotiation across the aisle. Another model is that we convince enough of our counterparts in the Senate to come over. And that comes back to the hearts and minds. It is incumbent upon all of us, whether we are an ally or a member of the LGBTQ plus community, to really pound on this with our state senators, because as John so artfully articulated, was that, you know, basically 80% of the country is highly supportive of the Equality Act, period. Period. So there's no way, even in the reddest of states, that you don't have at least a majority on this. So what we have to communicate to those senators that are unwilling to vote for the Equality Act, say, okay, so you're, just to be clear, and let's net it all down, you are voting against your constituents. You are voting against your constituents, because they're numerically, it's impossible for you to be voting correctly if you vote against this act, no matter what the state is. So I think that has to be pounded into everybody's head and make sure that we work on that very successfully. And you can call, and John said it well, call all the senators, those that are not interested in voting for the Equality Act, tell them why that's a really bad idea for their election.
You know, John also touched upon some of the discriminatory laws that are being passed in some states regarding trans folks when it comes to public restrooms and competitive sports in schools. Representative Newman, I was hoping that you could maybe kind of comment on that, and like, why do you think that this is such an issue or a wedge issue, or it seems like it's such a national crisis when it's probably just a small, a tiny population regarding this? Why do you think that this gets so much legs in these state houses?
You know, here's the super interesting thing that I think the Republican Party has done successfully and in a really despicable way, is that they've really centered, because they are no longer the party of ideas. They don't have any policy ideas, zero. Let's be clear on that, zero policy. The Democratic Party has solutions that are solving a pandemic we've never been through before. They saw in a matter of 5.5 months, we have basically gotten beyond the pandemic. We have turned around the economy and we have helped heal a nation. So that's what we've done in 6 months since we've been in power. The prior 4 years to that, they just kept on tearing things down and beating people up. So we know that doesn't work. So back to why Republicans are putting together these disgusting bills centered around these red herring issues. And let's just itemize them really quickly. So this nonsense about bathrooms is so old, it makes me yawn. The horse hockey around that, playing sports will be, or women in sports will be victimized is just beyond utter nonsense, right? And let me just talk about those two in terms of, why they're silly. Obviously, everyone on this call understands why that's silly, and most humans do. But to put a fine point on this is that several AP reporters went out to all these legislators that have created these bathroom bills and these red herring bills around some of the religious issues and all of these horrifying bills. And they asked very specifically, show us the study where this proves your point. Show us the anecdote, show us the episode, show us the data. And they couldn't even come up with an anecdote. 33 of them, to be clear. So when 33 legislators that have authored these bills can't even articulate an example of why these bills are needed, it's very telling. So they just don't have a leg to stand on. The reason they do this is because they don't have a leg to stand on. They center it around these fake issues around abortion and around LGBTQ rights and make up these nonsensical ideas around them. And then that's the only thing they have to hang on to now. So they can get people worked up on non-issues, but they can't come up with a solution or an idea or a policy to save their lives. That's why they do it.
It's interesting when you say despicable, because they're really playing to a narrative that people in the LGBTQ community are sexually deviant in some way.
Right.
And that's the core they're hitting when they pass legislation with respect to bathrooms, and it's sick. I saw a meme the other day on Facebook that said, if you're worried about heterosexual men dressing up as women and going into female restrooms so that they can sexually assault women in restrooms, your fear is not of transgender women, your fear is of predatory heterosexual men.
That's right.
So it's really sad.
Yeah.
So Representative Newman, you've made international news. And there was an incident on the floor of the House in which a person Marjorie, I don't want to call her a congressperson, said some pretty horrible things on the floor of the House. And you responded. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was right around the time the Equality Act was going through the House, and she decided to make a floor speech that was, I'm not going to repeat any of it because it was disgusting. And it enraged most of my colleagues. I made a speech about my daughter in return that identified that everybody deserves equality, nothing more and nothing less. We're not asking for anything special, and that, what my daughter has gone through is nothing more than others that have transitioned have gone through, and the trials and tribulations of anybody in the LGBTQ community. So we're not asking for anything beyond our civil rights, right? And I made that point, and I also put a flag out in front of my office, and little did I know that was going to create a tete-a-tete in my, and some level of game in my neighbor across the hall, the congressperson you just referred to. And she decided to take it to the nth degree. And I just kept on saying, you're welcome to do whatever you want. You have your civil rights and your First Amendment rights. I'm just saying that my daughter has rights, and everybody in the LGBTQ community. So it's just a positive thing. Whatever you want to do with that, whatever sick, twisted thing you want to say, you go ahead and do it, because that's your civil right, and I will defend your right to say what you want to say. But it does not negate the fact that everybody has their civil rights and everybody should be treated equally.
I think that there are some real consequences to some of the prejudicial statements that we hear in the discriminatory laws that are being passed, that we kind of have to address. I heard an alarming statistic that 70% of LGBTQ plus folks suffer from depression, anxiety, or some other mental health concern compared to 30% of the general population. Additionally, we know that the murder rate among transgender and gender nonconforming persons, especially those of color, is so much higher than the general population as well. Do you think, Representative Newman, it is appropriate to argue that the Equality Act not only provides protections, but it also addresses the safety and well-being of some of our most vulnerable and marginalized populations?
I think that's 100% right. It's a safety issue. It's a health issue. It is a societal issue. Because again, I just go back to when one of us is mistreated, all of us are mistreated, because that means everybody's vulnerable to that. So this is about not just, people used to say accept. Well, that's not good enough. You can accept a piece of mail. You need to respect and appreciate and see and embrace LGBTQ folks and everybody, whether you are a person of color, you are a disabled person, you are LGBTQ+, whatever you are. We need to respect, see, recognize, and embrace each other because we're human beings. So at the end of the day, this safety issue and health issue is critical because until we are doing those things, you know, that we are recognizing and seeing and respecting one another, that hate that builds up in everybody is super unhealthy for the person that has the hate and super unhealthy for the person who's receiving the hate. So stopping the hate is going to be a super healthy and safe thing for everybody to do.
Yeah, and that's why what you did by raising the transgender pride flag in the halls of Congress, which was probably the first time that flag has ever flown there. To you, it's hard to explain to allies how that makes us feel in the LGBT community. It almost feels like we're getting, our souls are being hugged by someone fighting on our behalf, because you know, you live in the closet for so long and you're so terrified of everything. And when someone takes a risk, and you're a new Congress person, you just were elected, you take, and that was a risk. That act of bravery really means a lot to us. And it's those acts of bravery that I think will end this sort of hatred that's perpetuated by someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene.
That's so kind of you to say that, but I want to make a comment about that. Truly, I so appreciate it. I'm honored to hear that. But I didn't feel it was a risk. I just did it. Like, honestly, like my comms director and I were running to go do votes. Honestly, like I was like chugging along and said, oh, Marie, you forgot to put your new flag out. And I was like, oh, shoot, let's go get that done. So I just put it in, and it was not I'm making a statement. And it's like, oh, this is my baby. So everybody knows my baby's right here, you know? And so it wasn't a risk for me, and I didn't feel endangered by it. Only later did I realize that that was a bit unconventional. But no one should feel that that's a risk. No one should feel that's a brave act. It shouldn't be a brave act. It should just be, hey, this is my baby's flag, you know?
But by you doing that makes it a conversation nationally and internationally. And that's what's going to make it not such a bold act. So
yeah. Let's hope that.
So we know that you got some negativity and some negative feedback when you put the flag up. Were you surprised about any positive feedback that you received from some of your colleagues?
So here's the good news is that all of my Democratic colleagues lauded that effort. And again, I was sort of surprised it got so much attention, because I was like, well, I'm just demonstrating that I love my child. You know, I mean, I don't know what the big act is here. But it was really kind of everyone to be very supportive. Now, when the super far right wing went after me, you know, I don't know if it's because my family has been through a lot. In addition to my daughter going through those challenges, and by the way, she has suffered with depression and anxiety as well. Separately, my son, who's a little bit older than her, was a severely bullied child, and we went through enormous amount of you know, therapy and help for him. He's now doing well. Both of my children are doing well, Godspeed. But I guess I have sort of a tough skin now. So when someone beats me up, sadly, and it's not a great thing, I don't really feel it as badly as many people, because we've been through a lot, right? So I have a bit of a shield, but there was disgusting things said to us. And I was just like, oh, that's very sad. But remember, that says a lot about the far right wing. That says nothing about us, nothing.
I have kind of a Congress gossip question. I've heard that there's going to be a QAnon caucus.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that's not true, because this country has taken a bad turn. If there's going to be, well, I don't know if it's the country, more the Republican Party's taken a bad turn if there's going to be a QAnon caucus in Congress.
Well, I know that my neighbor, we'll call her, attempted to create a white supremacy caucus a couple of months, probably a month or two ago, and it failed miserably, but it had all of the people that you might think that try to join it. But it didn't get a lot of traction. So I don't think that's going to happen. But I think they did attempt it.
So the QAnon caucus is still a potential. I mean, I guess if the white
could happen. I guess it could happen. Yeah, the QAnon white supremacist caucus didn't catch on as much as they had hoped. But yeah, anything's possible with and here's what I'll say about my Republican colleagues. Some actually, and just to be clear, some of them did reach out after that incident with Marjorie Taylor Greene and were very apologetic and very kind to me over that couple days period. What's sad is that only a couple of them decided to be public about it, because they even confessed to me that, I'll just get bullied, Marie. And I was like, God, that's awful that you will get bullied by your own colleagues for just supporting a good thing. So let's be clear that party is in tumult and is ripping itself apart. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Many times in our history, we've had various parties in our country last for a 50-year period, and then they fall apart for various reasons. And it's usually internal eruption, right? So we'll see how this goes for the Republican Party.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, if you have a question for Representative Newman, please submit the question in the Q&A portion of the comment section. We will be asking her as many questions as we can get to toward the end. Nisha will be moderating that. So please submit your questions. So if the Republican Party disappears, though, that's not necessarily a good thing for democracy either.
Mm-mm. We need two parties. We absolutely need two strong parties to have a strong voice and a policy voice. There are folks that I truly respect on the other side of the aisle that we all have the Republicans that are, I'll just call them the sane Republicans, want this experiment of a democracy and republic, which is the United States, to go on and be well. Those people are not discriminatory. They're not racist. They're not anti-LGBTQ. They simply think about the economy in a very different way. I mean, it really comes down to that. It comes down to taxes and some other things. It doesn't come down to treating each other with respect. So there are some Republicans that have our best intentions. We just disagree on policy, right? And those are the people that we need to go forth and have a Republican Party so we can continue to have a strong debate and have a counterbalance. Because without a counterbalance, you become a monopoly. And whether it's the economy or society or government, a monopoly is never a good thing. So we absolutely need two strong parties. And I hope that the Republican Party figures itself out, because we do need a good counterpart.
So I want to move on to another topic, the January 6th insurrection. You were elected to Congress November of 2020 and then sworn in January 3rd, if I'm not mistaken, of 2021. Right. So the insurrection was 3 days later. Were you there?
We were. So we had gotten sworn in, and then obviously on January 6th, what our job as Congress, which it is in every Congress, is to certify the election. And that's a process by which that It starts in the House and you go state by state and you certify each state's findings, which we all know President Biden won by a margin of 7 million votes and significant amount, and it was all clear. And it was, and even Republican secretaries of state and a Republican leader in the cabinet all determined that, yes, this was our safest and fairest election ever in our history. So having said that, that day, we were in the process of doing that. Some of the Republicans decided that they would object to the election and state by state. And so what we didn't know is that what they were calling the demonstration outside the Capitol building was gaining quite a bit of momentum. And, it ended up being an assault on capitalism and a deadly event. It killed ultimately 6 people now total, and deeply injured another 100 and slight injuries to another 100 on that. So we had a lot of people hurt, badly maimed. It was very serious stuff. We had Capitol Police holding a riot guard that is 20 pounds, wearing a 20-pound vest, holding that for hours at a time. Can you imagine? It's like old hand-to-hand combat. So I just want to be clear that this was, that it wasn't just that they vandalized the Capitol. They were there. They were very clear. They were chanting, "Kill Mike Pence, kill all Democrats." They had a list. This was all pre-planned. They had weapons in armaments boxes surrounding the Capitol that were buried and in hidden places.
Wow.
This was very, very serious stuff. So that day, I was super lucky. I was in a pretty safe place. I was in my office building, which had not been breached, but the Capitol building had been breached and some of the other office buildings had been breached. So we were, my staff and I were safe. And so I feel very good and lucky. But that day, I didn't quite absorb what had happened because I had received texts from friends that were hiding under the seats on the House floor, calling their families saying goodbye forever.
Wow.
And I will never forget that. I'm blessed that I was safe, but that could have been even more tragic than it was. So that was a rough start to a new job.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I never heard about the weapons being buried.
Oh yeah, they were there. That's how they distracted because police squads were being sent all over the Capitol campus area. If you can envision all the Capitol buildings, it's the Capitol itself, and then there's buildings associated with it, right? And they kept on being sent to different places because suspicious packages were being dropped. So that's what they were finding, is big bags and boxes of armaments. And that's how they created chaos. I mean, this was a highly sophisticated, orchestrated event.
Wow. What's going to happen with an inquiry now, Representative? Yeah. It's kind of the Republicans are refusing to move forward with the inquiry. I read something recently that Nancy Pelosi has some ideas about how to still get the inquiry and the investigation moving forward. What are some of those ideas? What's happening next?
Yeah, I think that they're willing to continue to negotiate with our colleagues across the aisle for a week more. After that, I think we are going to have a partisan commission, and we will do that, and we will move forward with that. But I think that Nancy Pelosi is right. We have to try every way possible to see if we can get a bipartisan agreement on a commission.
What would a partisan commission mean then versus having a bipartisan commission?
It would, harder to say what the outcome would be. It would likely be a documentation of the facts. And at least it's in the history books then, and it's available to all of us. Now, remember, there are some criminal cases being pursued across all of these rioters. And then also there are allegations of a few members of Congress that were engaged in this activity. So we'll see. Nothing's been proven yet, but we'll see if there's any indictments from that. But it's very serious stuff.
Yeah.
We want to thank you, Representative Newman, for sharing these wonderful, insightful thoughts about the insurrection, transphobia in Congress, as well as your support for the Equality Act. And before we wrap up, we want to get to some questions from our audience. Nisha, I'll turn it over to you now.
Awesome, thank you. And again, I mimic what my colleague has said, Representative Newman. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to speak with us about these very important issues. We do have some questions here for you today. The first question from the audience is, how many Republicans are on board with the Equality Act? And if bipartisanship isn't working, are there currently any other options or alternatives that are on the table?
Yeah, I would say there's 2, 3, 4 Republican senators that I think would, if it was on the Senate floor today, that they would vote for it. And others are being worked on. I'm told by my friends that are senators that, you know, there's definitely hope there. So let's hope that that happens. You know, the other thing that's possible too is that we have some level of negotiated filibuster abolishment where, you know, issues of civil rights and our democracy are not included under the filibuster, which would be a, you know, moderated filibuster rule. So that's another option. And then don't forget that the pressure from the grassroots and constituents is very significant. And again, we have 80% approval in this country. So there's no numerical way possible that any one state is less than 50% approving of this bill.
Thank you. The next question is, have you seen any inkling of compassion or humanity in Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene?
I mean, I think that's the shortest answer on the planet. It's just no.
Okay, moving on. The final question that we have is, if hypothetically you assume the real leverage to influence some legislators may be through donors and not constituents, is there a strategy to influence the donors?
Sure, I think that a lot of donors can use their leverage that way. And you should talk to donors that are both Democrat and Republican. Say, look, make it clear to them that you're not supporting bigotry. And call them out on it. It's like, okay, if you're giving money to that Republican that is anti-Equality Act, then effectively you support bigotry, and you need to just call it what it is.
Well, that looks like the questions we have for now. Anyone, if you have any other questions to submit, please feel free to submit them as we still have more time.
I have a question, Representative Newman. If it's not, I don't think it's a reality, but who am I, that the Equality Act will pass through the Senate for President Biden to sign due to the filibuster. And it looks like the filibuster isn't going anywhere. Is there any talk from the Biden administration of signing an executive order that would, for all intents and purposes, mirror the Equality Act so that at least we get some consistency from the federal government among the states as to what should or should not happen?
Yeah, it's whenever you do an executive order, just remember that it doesn't have the same ability a law does. It can change a lot, but it can't do everything. And I think actually President Biden is committed to that. But he's also committed to talking his colleagues across the aisle into voting for this act. And remember, we have 51 votes, so it's really like we have to get 9 votes. Right now we have 4 or 5 Republicans, 3, 4, 5 on the dais. So I think it's everybody working on this. It's the Biden administration, it's members of Congress, it is all of the states' constituents talking to their senators saying that if you don't vote for this, you're a bigot. Let's just call it what it is and stop playing games.
I didn't realize you had that many Republican senators on board. That's
yeah.
good.
I mean, I think that we can get that. It's just that it would be better if it was 9.
Right. Right.
So it looks like we got some more questions here. Another question is, other than calling your elected officials, is there a way for voters to get involved with passing the act?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can do everything from using your social media platforms and tagging them in social media You can send them texts, letters, emails, calls, all of those things. You can show up at their district office and say, you know what, and have protest at their district office. Say that, you know, like, we're not going anywhere. I just want to be, you know, just be clear. And again, call it what it is. If you are not voting for the Equality Act, you are a bigot. And you have to be really clear with them, with respect, and be a peaceful demonstrator always.
We have another, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nisha.
It looks like we have another question that came in. It says verbatim, it seems sometimes that Democrats are playing checkers and Republicans are flipping tables whenever they are behind. When is the time to follow the real world model and stop playing nice and start getting real?
You know, I think that we are. I know that it doesn't always look like that from the outside, but the reason we got the American Rescue Package to be as large as it was is because we threw over tables. We did. And so we have, and we should, and that was the American people speaking out and understanding the incredible need that people had. So as the American people working with the Democratic Congress to make sure that that package was as large, fulsome, and robust as it could be, and it was. So we got that done. We're working on the American Job Act and the Families Act, and we're making progress. Equality Act is critically important. HR 1 is critically important. Our Democracy Act, all of those things, everything is important. Gun reform, all of that. And it is a combination of negotiating and being a bad guy, being a tough guy. And we try to use both of those tools whenever we can.
Thank you. Another question that we have is, what's the Democratic plan to make sure we maintain a majority at the midterm elections?
I would say that plan is not good enough right now. I'm going to be honest about that. And I would say make sure that whoever, if anybody asks you to be part of a voter registration project or a get out the vote, that you get your hiney out the door and get it done. I'm just telling everybody. Everybody on this call, tell 10 friends that your only job for the next election is to make sure that everybody you know votes, and votes Democratic, quite frankly, because we know that I just talked about it a little while ago, that the Republicans are the party of no ideas, no solutions. Just make sure that that you know their very specific anti-choice and anti-LGBTQ views are spread somehow. And it is all of our jobs to get people to vote. It is all of our jobs to register people, and it is all of our jobs to get people to vote before in early voting and on the election day. And that's your only job moving forward.
Thank you.
Representative Newman, I know that I'm not sure if John covered this in his lecture, I can't remember, that the bill that was passed just recently is slightly different. It also includes not only transgender folks, but gender nonconforming and non-binary folks.
Yep.
Why is that an important addition to the Equality Act?
Because more and more what we're seeing is that the notion of being trans or one gender, one identity, whatever it is just no longer the case. Is that a lot of people are gender fluid and they don't even know they're gender fluid. You know what I mean? So it is we have to acknowledge all people and all people the way they feel. And sometimes they feel differently on different days. If there's one thing that I learned through my EVs experience is that it is not a linear continuum, right? Is that, and even if you are solidly in one gender identity, you even have some continuum there, you know, like, because I'm sort of a badass, I have some male qualities, right? You know, and so no one's perfectly one thing or the other in general. And then some people are more fluid than others. So it is very important that we acknowledge that as an identity and make sure everybody feels comfortable with who they truly are. And some people are non-binary and gender fluid, and that's A-okay.
Representative Newman, I wanted to chime in really quick and ask a question.
Sure.
Based on your thoughts, is the Fairness for All Act, for all intent and purpose, dead?
No, I don't think it's dead. I think that it is, it needs a lot of work and probably has to make one more pass through the Congress, but I don't think it's that.
I guess maybe providing some context for the Fairness for All Act, I think deals more with the religious aspects, but I mean, if you have any thoughts on it, I'd love to hear it just real quick.
You know what, I actually have not talked to any, I'll be honest, I haven't talked to my colleagues about where that's at or where it's going right now, so I don't have a lot to add there. I'm just being honest.
No, that's totally fine. It's always on my radar, and maybe John has a quick comment.
He may.
Trying to come back on screen here. Oh, but hi. Well, so that people know, the Fairness for All Act is a alternative version of a non-discrimination law that would also ban sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination expressly in employment, housing, public accommodations, federally funded programs and services. And so in many ways, it's like the Equality Act, but it is full of exemptions for religious institutions. And it only had 22 co-sponsors in the House, and there's no version of it that's been introduced in the Senate yet. I think what we're most likely to see is it used for some negotiating purposes in the Senate, where some of the Republicans who are not yet supported the Equality Act may turn to it for certain provisions that they'd like to see as amendments to the Equality Act. You know, and so then one has to evaluate, well, what are the advantages of having a law, even if it's an imperfect law, versus having no law? You know, and how far are we willing to go that in a way that would permit certain forms of discrimination to continue by religious schools or by religious employers in order to get protections for people in the 29 states that currently don't have them.
Thank you, John. Representative Newman, we're kind of coming to the close of our session here. I want to give you an opportunity to make some last remarks. After that, I'll have my colleague Skip Harsh kind of go over some of the CLE rules for this event, and then Adam is going to take us out. Representative Newman, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, let me start by thanking all of you for your great work. I know that all of you have done amazing on the ground work for your colleagues and for your community. And I can't tell you from my family's experience how much I appreciate the work you've done before the work that we've done, right? But I also want to say that we're all a team. I'm always here for everybody, and I'm glad to help in any way I can. So feel free to knock on our door anytime you need support or help or questions. And I also just want to say, be hopeful, get excited, and protect your democracy. And when I say get involved with a voter project or voter registration, I'm going to use my mom's voice now and say, get it done, get out there. I'm not playing. So protect your democracy, protect against discrimination, make sure that you're calling your legislators, both state, county, as well as federal. And please keep on fighting. And thank you for everything tonight. It's been a lovely evening.
Thank you, Representative Newman.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Skip, can you give us some of the rules of the CLE?
Yes, thank you everyone for accommodating the technical difficulties earlier. If you're an Illinois attorney and you're seeking Illinois CLE credit, I have your question answered as you registered, and I will be checking the attendance report to make sure that people view the entire participation. You will be receiving an email with a link to the course evaluation, which you'll need to fill out in order to get CLE credit in Illinois. And then within a couple of weeks, we will provide you with your certificate. So I want to say thank you all very much for accommodating the technical glitch.
Thank you, Skip. And I want to recognize the Women's Bar Association of Illinois, the Puerto Rican Bar Association of Illinois, the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois, and the Alliance of Illinois Judges for helping promote this event. It means a lot to LAGBAC and its members. We'd also like to thank Mariana Capron, from my law firm, Shoji Kanto and Fleck. She's the marketing director here, and she put together a lot of the marketing materials that were great. Also, special thanks to John, of course. You were great, John. So informative, and we thank you for your time. And Joel Morales volunteered to do some PR work for LAGBAC. He's the partner of one of our board members, Jeremy Gray, and it was his idea that sparked the whole plan of tonight. So thank you, Joel, for that great idea. And thank you all for attending. It's been a great night. And thank you again. See you all soon.
Thank you. The recording will be made available on our website.